And so what is our mission here today? Our mission here today is to demand truth. Our mission here today is to demand truth in teaching on university campuses, to demand truth in reporting, to demand truth in discussions, to demand truth in films, to learn the truth, to gather the evidence, to do the hard scholarship, to uncover the history, and to let the chips fall where they may. We have nothing to fear from the whole truth. What we want is nuance. What we want is accuracy. What we want is complete, total veracity. Is it perfect? Are there problems? Of course there are problems. No country in the world is ever perfect. Certainly no country facing the kinds of threats, internal and external, that Israel faces. But we will thrive on the truth. What we need is contextual, comparative, constructive criticism. Criticism is good. Criticism is patriotism. All of us who love our country, the United States, are prepared to be critical. All of us who love Israel should be prepared to be critical, as long as the criticism is constructive, contextual, and comparative. Moral clarity emerges from the unvarnished truth. And so my message to you is pursue truth. Pursue truth without fear. Pursue truth without compromise. That's what Camera does. Do not fear the truth. Challenge, challenge, challenge. Constantly make sure that those on the other side are challenged in every forum, in every format, in every context. Pursue truth, and we will prevail. Thank you very much.
We're going to take 2 questions for Professor Dershowitz at this time. Any questions? Yes.
You convinced us all. Are there any questions, particularly from students? Do students have questions, particularly the kinds of questions that are asked on college campuses? Yeah, I would appreciate any questions from students. Yeah.
Wait for the
I'll repeat the question if I can hear it. Okay, let me repeat the question. The question, as I understand it, is we're hearing a lot about the ongoing peace process between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. How can there be discussions of peace when really Hamas is the governing authority, the Palestinian Authority? Well, it's not quite accurate. Hamas won an election, but it was not an election that replaced the prime minister of the Palestinian Authority. And then, of course, Hamas, by violence and illegitimacy, took over completely in the Gaza. The Palestinian Authority is the recognized authority of the Palestinian government, or whatever it now is called, and Israel can negotiate a peace with the Palestinian Authority. Now, it's not going to bring about a cessation of rocket attacks from Gaza. It's not going to bring about, you saw in yesterday or 2 days ago's New York Times, a long story about how Hezbollah is preparing to do Iran's bidding if there were to be peace between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Hezbollah is prepared with 35 to 45,000 rockets. Peace between Israel and the Palestinians will not bring about complete peace in the Middle East. Shalom, shalom, ve'en shalom is what the prophet says. Peace, peace, but there is no peace. But a piece of the peace is better than no peace. And I think that the important point is not to blame Israel in any way because the government of Israel has stuck to its word. Remember, it promised the President of the United States and promised the people of Israel, which is a democracy, that there'd be a one-time freeze. The Palestinians have been asked also to engage in a freeze in incitements, a freeze in the kind of rhetoric that they're not permitted to authorize on Palestinian television and radio, in which they do every Friday, naming squares after murderers. That kind of freeze the Palestinians aren't prepared to accept. The Palestinians aren't prepared to accept a freeze in which they acknowledge that Israel is the home of the Jewish people. So the idea of requiring Israel to put its cards on the table first and give up an important negotiating position as a condition to continuing to talk, it seems to me, however one might stand on whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing, for an additional 30, 60, or 90-day freeze to go forward, to put the responsibility on Israel for somehow not wanting to have a peace process is nonsense. I spent hours with Prime Minister Netanyahu recently when, as you know, some of you might know, that he asked me to take an important job for Israel at the UN, which I was not able to do, but we had a lot of time to talk about the peace process, and I am completely convinced that Benjamin Netanyahu is totally dedicated to the peace process, totally dedicated to trying to bring about a peaceful resolution between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And I'm hoping, newspapers today and yesterday suggest that maybe some compromise is in the offing, and if some border agreements can be reached, then the settlement issue becomes a less significant one, because Israel would be permitted to build within those areas of its border, and the freeze would automatically take place if there were border agreements as to areas outside. So this is an ongoing process, and it's certainly one that I support. But the important point is, if the peace process were to fail, God forbid, Israel should not be demonized for that failure. It should not be blamed for that failure. You know, you hear the myth that if Israel only makes peace with the Palestinians, Iran will disarm itself. It's total nonsense. But it sets the framework for blaming Israel if the peace process doesn't go forward, and if Iran does develop nuclear weapons, it sets a framework for blaming and scapegoating Israel for everything. One more question.
One more question.
From a student particularly.
Professor.
Do we have, okay, the student back there, yeah. Right.
We know it's happening. We know it's coming. So my question for you is, what do you think is the best plan of action for us as a student group combating this BDS that's coming to campus?
It's a very hard question, and I think there are two possible tactics. One tactic is to embrace boycott and divestment and just insist that it be done in order of how bad a country's human rights record really is, and get experts to show how, if you made a list of the 200 countries in the world, that you'd get to Israel about 188th on the list. That you'd have to go through virtually every country in the third world, many countries in the second and first world, and that BDS is really a way of removing attention from terrible abuses. I'm in the process of writing a book called The Second 6 Million, in which I think I prove in just a few hundred pages that 6 million additional people have been killed in preventable genocides since 1948, when we said never again, while the United Nations has done nothing but debate Israel. Take 1975. 1975, close to 2 million people are murdered in Cambodia by the Khmer Rouge. Not a single debate at the United Nations. What's the United Nations doing? It's debating whether Zionism is racism. During the time of the Darfur, during the time of the Rwanda, during the time of all the genocides that were preventable, all we talked about was divestment against Israel, boycotts against Israel. So what I would do is turn the finger back and say it's folks who want to divest against Israel and boycott Israel who are responsible for the terrible genocides around the world. Let's focus on those genocides. Let's focus on real human rights abuses. Let's focus on the Chinese occupation of Tibet. Let's focus on the plight of the Kurdish people. Let's focus on so many other real human rights violations that are going on, because the focus on Israel, the real victim of that is not Israel. The real victim of that are the hundreds of thousands of people, sometimes millions of people, who have been killed while the world debates only about Israel. And to throw the responsibility back on those students who don't care about Darfur, who don't care about Rwanda, who don't care about China, who don't care about real human rights abuses, that to me is an effective way of dealing with this phony boycott divestment campaign. As you know, it recently more or less failed at the University of Johannesburg, although they are trying to now require Ben-Gurion University to accept certain principles which Ben-Gurion University can't obviously accept if they are alone in being asked to do that. Mostly the divestment boycotts have failed. There are also legal actions that can be taken. If you discriminate based on national origin or based on nationhood, that violates a current law in the United States and Great Britain and in every other country. So the important point is to fight back. Again, truth. Again, disclose what is really going on in the world today. Talk about Israel's human rights record. Talk about the Supreme Court of Israel. Talk about how Israel does internal investigations of its own failures at wartime, recently indicting 2 young Israeli soldiers who had improperly used a young boy as a human shield. Ask what Hamas has done to investigate their own problems. Ask what the Palestinian Authority. So grab on to their very rhetoric of human rights and try to turn it not only against them, but turn it in the direction of truth. Speak up on behalf of the real victims of genocide. Speak up on behalf of the real victims of human rights. Don't be perceived as against human rights. Don't be perceived as against genocide prevention. Make the point that you're the ones who are really at the forefront. Look who was at the forefront of the campaign against the genocide in Darfur. It was the Jewish community here in Boston. It was the Jewish community around the United States. We cannot ever take second place when it comes to fighting for human rights. And I think putting human rights in perspective, putting human rights in a broader context is the best weapon against divestment and boycott, which is all based on a lie. So keep up your great fight. Keep up your efforts. Students particularly, make sure that nothing ever is unanswered. If you need help, Camera will be there to help you. If you need help academically, Professor Kotler and I will be there to help you. Just remain vigilant and make sure that silence is never the response, that you always have to respond to falsehood by truth. So may you go from strength to strength. Thank you very much.